Okay. Right. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Airtime Transportation and the Atmosphere. This morning, we'll be talking to you about air quality in the Metro Plan Orlando region. All right. And our presentation today is brought to you by Mobility Week. And we're also partnering with the University of Central Florida, the College of Engineering and Computer Science, and MetroPlan Orlando. So how to participate in today's webinar. Um, we want to start off with a little housekeeping. We have two presenters who are able to speak. If you have anything that you'd like to ask our presenters about, please use the Q&A function. This will be available to you throughout the presentation, so you don't have to wait until the end to ask your questions, though we will wait until the end to review those questions. In the chat box, you'll find a link to our YouTube channel where you can find a live stream of this session. Once the session is over, a recording of today's presentation will be available on the YouTube channel. At the end of today's presentation, we will also post a link to the survey we're requesting that you take, and I'll give you some more information on that survey later today. We will also prompt you with poll questions throughout the session. We'd love to have your participation for this. And as I mentioned, our event today is in conjunction with the Florida Department of Transportation's Mobility Week. Mobility Week is a cooperative event by the FDOT and its partner agencies to promote awareness of safe multimodal transportation choices. During Mobility Week, counties, cities, and transportation agencies host events and offer special promotions to encourage Floridians to try new transportation options. MetroPlan Orlando is also partnering FDOT later today at Link Central Station for the Blind Experience, where we will be promoting awareness of the white cane law and pedestrian safety. So if you have time in your schedule, please check us out. During our time today, we'll be discussing MetroPlan, or who MetroPlan is, and why we care about air quality, and what the Ozone Contingency Plan is, and also potential policy options for improving air quality in our region. Today, we have two presenters, Dr. Haofei Yu from the University of Central Florida, and me, Sarah Larson, with MetroPlan Orlando. Dr. Yu is an expert on air quality modeling and emissions estimation. Oh, sorry. Um, um, and he is leading the team at UCF on the Ozone Contingency Plan. And I'm a transportation planner whose focus is on public transportation and health and transportation. I'm the project manager for the Ozone Contingency Plan. So first, I'm going to talk a little bit about MetroPlan Orlando. MetroPlan Orlando is the metropolitan planning organization for the Orlando area, and we span 3 counties, Orange, Osceola, and Seminole counties. Our planning area is, sorry, about the size of Delaware. And so we've got a lot of ground and air to cover. We work together with local municipalities in our region to prioritize funding for transportation projects across our region. So you might be thinking, how does air quality play into planning for bikes, buses, trains, and sidewalks, and cars? Well, the decisions we make as a planning organization impacts the air we all breathe. In fact, we are federally required to monitor the air quality in our region, but more on that in a minute. First, we have a polling question for you all. When is it important to have clean air? In the morning, in the afternoon, in the evening, or all the time? All right, and you should see that poll right now. All right, we're getting some responses in, and thankfully, it seems like everyone is in agreement. Is so far that the most important time to have clean air is all the time. Um, um, so we agree with you at Metro Plan Orlando. We felt that all of our residents and visitors should be able to breathe clean air all of the time. So we wanted to get a better idea of what the state of air is in our region. So we decided to partner with our friends at the University of Central Florida to explore three main topics. We wanted to know what were the most important sources of air pollution. We wanted to know where and when the worst is happening. We wanted to investigate policy options to reduce emissions. This is not our first time partnering with the University of Central Florida, actually, to model emissions in our region. In fact, we had a study 10 years ago looking at the same thing. However, this time, uh, we have seen massive improvements in data and modeling technology, and we've also been able to learn from others across the country on how to mitigate emissions. Not only that, but as a growing region, it's more important now than ever to keep an eye on our air quality. So, ozone contingency plan. That's how we got there. We had those goals and we decided to get going on this project. So we've already started it. And we gave a preview of our initial findings to our board and committees in May of this year. Our partners at UCF have already completed the emissions modeling and mapping for vehicle emissions and for other sources. Dr. Yu will provide an overview of those findings in just a moment. What we are looking at now is in the policies that we should look at implementing in the future to make sure our emissions don't get too out of control. And that's why we need your help today. So we can find out which policies you think are possible and which policies you're not a fan of. And we'll review the policy options after the brief overview of our findings. So before we jump into those findings, we want to hear from you about whether or not you're worried about the state of our air. So our policy, our poll question now is, how concerned are you about the state of air quality in Central Florida? Are you very concerned, somewhat concerned, not very concerned at all, or not very concerned, or not at all concerned? All right, and that should appear for you now. All right, we're getting more diverse answers from what I'm seeing, so looking forward to sharing those results in just a moment. You still have time to answer. Are you very concerned, somewhat concerned, not very concerned, or not at all concerned? All right. I think we have a consensus here. The majority of our respondents are somewhat concerned with 64%. Some of you are not very concerned. And then at least one of you is very concerned about the state of air quality. And I had a feeling that no one was going to say not at all concerned because you're joining us in this webinar today. So at least everyone has some awareness and some concern about air quality in our region. So now I'm going to pass it over to Dr. Haofei Yu, and he's going to explain the findings and let you know whether you need to, how worried you need to be. Right. Okay.
All right. Thanks, Sarah, for the introduction. So I'll take over here to dive into more details about ozone contingency plan. So the first thing is why we choose ozone. There are many types of air pollutant out there. So we choose ozone is simply because it's one of the most important air pollutants. So it's found everywhere across the entire United States. There's no corner you cannot find ozone from there. And the studies have shown that it has serious health impacts, and not only on human health, and also has ecological impact on the environment. So to many, ozone may sound surprising because we all know ozone layer. When we have ozone layer way up there in the stratosphere, we call it good ozone because it absorbs harmful UV radiation, it protects our skin. But the problem is when we have ozone near ground level where people live, that become the problem because it's bad ozone. When you inhale ozone, it impacts your health. So because ozone is so important, the Clean Air Act, one of the most important air quality legislation in the United States, set ambient concentration levels of ozone. So EPA actually set up monitors all over the country to measure ozone concentration in the air. If ozone concentration in one region exceeds the regulatory limits, then that region will be in trouble because that means very expensive. We're talking about dozens, even not hundreds of millions of dollars, costly mandatory cleanup actions. So next slide, please. So ozone is quite interesting because unlike many other pollutants, ozone, you hardly see any emissions. Ozone is not emitted, rather there are teeny emission, but rather it's forming in the air. So ozone is a chemical reaction product from the reaction of nitrogen oxide, we call it NOx, and volatile organic compounds or VOCs. And when you have VOC, the NOx, and sunlight, you have a chemical reaction which forms ozone. So to control ozone, we cannot control emission because there are virtually none. So what we do is we have control NOx and VOC emissions. Now NOx, it can come from many different places. Most important place would be burning of fossil fuels. If you're burning, you have to have oxygen in the air that give you NOx. And VOCs come, the source of VOC is much more diverse. VOC is anything that's volatile. You have gasoline, that's a lot of them over there, and you have vegetations. Sometimes you walk in the forest, you smell the wonderful, relaxing forest smell. That's actually VOCs. They are not strictly speaking pollution per se, but they do involve in chemical reaction that forms ozone. Next slide, please. So in the Central Florida region, so here this figure basically shows the ozone calculate the ozone regulatory levels in the Central Florida region in the past 10 years or so. So in 2015, ozone concentration level standard was actually tightened. It used to be 75, now it's tightened to 70. The unit is parts per billion, ppb. Now, in this region, what we see is that the matter level is actually from several stations in this region is actually quite close to regulatory standards. Starting from 2015, we start to see an increasing level of ozone pollution. And in 2019, it reached its peak. It's only like 2 ppb away from the limit. So in 2020 and 2021, we have COVID. So a lot of vehicles were not driving. So that's why we see the declining. But it's worrying because we start to see it's really close to regulatory levels. Next slide, please. So as Sarah mentioned, this study has 3 different tasks. The first task, we want to estimate vehicle emissions. We run this model called MOVES to estimate vehicle emissions in the Central Florida region. So we actually run the model for 2011, 2017. It's a little bit surprising because now it's 2022 already. The reason why we choose 2011, 2017 is we want to see a trend. First, we want to see over the years what's the impact. And the second is the latest data we can have from EPA. The latest one at the start of the study is 2017. There is a significant delay in the data availability. So what we found is from 2011 to 2017, the NOx emission in this region actually decreased by almost 1/3, by basically 1/3. And if you look at the composition of NOxes, we see like overwhelming majority, 92% of NOx from vehicles is actually tailpipe exhaust. There are many other sources, such as when you start the engine, when the engine is cold, the engine will emit some sort of a little bit emission, and from the vehicle's evap system, it will emit a little bit emission, but the vast majority come from tailpipe exhaust while the vehicle is running on the road. Next slide, please. So we also look at the VOC emission in this region. So similarly, we see a significant declining, which is almost 1/3 of declining from 2011 to 2017. But the source of VOC is much more diverse. So remember, most of NOx come from vehicle engine running exhaust, but most of VOC is actually from vehicles. It's come from much more diverse for refueling. So when you put the fuel in the tank, the fuel gonna purge the fuel vapors out. And that's actually a big source of VOC emissions. Running exhaust is one thing, and the EVAP system now become quite important. So if you're not familiar, the vehicle EVAP system is, in a fuel tank, you have gasoline or diesel, but they do evaporate, and they evaporate very easily. So there has to be a system in place in your vehicle. Every single vehicle has that to control it, because you don't want your car to explode. And that fuel vapor is actually fuel. You can burn it. So you want to be recovered and control that. That's an EVAP system. That system, you cannot seal it. So somewhat you will have some leak in there. And we also mentioned starting vehicle. So when you crank the vehicle start, in that moment, you have some emission emitted. So the whole idea is all the NOx, vast majority of NOx come from tailpipe exhaust, but VOC source is more diverse. It could come from different processes. Next slide, please. So in addition to that, in the first task for vehicle emission, in addition to total emission, we also did analysis on roadway links. So this, of course, is only for tailpipe exhaust on different roads. We've calculated about the hourly emissions in the 2 years on over 36,000 roadway segments in this region. So the result shown here is only for Seminole County. So you see here on the top two panel are 2011 and bottom two panel of 2017. Left two panel are NOx, right two panel for VOC. So the whole idea is as shown in the Seminole County region, you see some roadway pop up. The darker color meaning it's higher emission per mile of road. So naturally, you will see the highest emission always occur on the roads heavily traveled. You can clearly see 417 and I-4 over there. So between 2011, 2017, you see the color gets lighter, meaning the emission actually reduces, simply because the cars are getting cleaner and cleaner. Next slide, please. Now those are results. Very briefly went over the vehicle emission result. I want to quickly jump to task 2, which is if we look at every emission from every source we can think of. So what we do is we run 2 different models. First, we run a weather model, then we run an emission model to calculate the emission from tens of thousands different sources and source categories in this region. So what we see here, the result shown here is basically the total NOx emission from all the sources we can think of between 2011 and 2017. You can see that we actually have 4 counties here. And the reason we also include Lake County is simply because we share this thing called air shed, simply meaning we closely share the air resources. So we need to take them into account too. So the whole idea is, well, you can clearly see some county, especially Orange County, has the highest emission simply because too much population and too much cars over here. Between 2011 and 2017, you can clearly see in all 4 counties, NOx emission declined from 2011 to 2017. And different color corresponding to different categories, rough categories. What you can see is the motor vehicles in this yellow color. It's basically, it has the biggest portion. It is most important. You can also see off-road engines. So these are, for example, lawn mowers, construction equipment, the jet ski, 4x4, side-by-side, something like that. That is engines running off-road. It's not on the roadway, but it's running off-road. Now, these engines actually contribute to a significant portion of the emissions. You can also see power generation in Orange County. It's because we have power plant here, but in other counties, you don't see them. So the biggest, most clear apparent finding would be that, well, if you look at this different bar chart, you will see motor vehicles is actually clearly running on the roadways and clearly account for, actually on average, about 63% total NOx. It's a huge portion. That's why transportation is important here. Next slide, please. Now, these are the emissions for VOCs. Now, these, as you can tell, the color is very different. It's simply meaning the source is very different. So the biggest source for VOCs is, in fact, the vegetation. Vegetation accounts on average 68% total VOCs. And this is because we have a lot of forest, we have a lot of trees, and these trees, they do emit all kinds of different smells. Again, they're not strictly speaking pollution per se, but they do involve in chemical reactions that actually form ozone. That's one of the reasons controlling ozone is tricky, because we cannot cut down all the trees for the sake of just controlling air pollution. So the whole idea is that if you see the bar chart in each individual county, you also see that from 2011 to 2017, we see VOC emission declined. And if you look at the composition of different bar chart, you see the biggest portion is vegetation, but in other portion, in portion other than vegetation, you see motor vehicles, off-road engines, and fire pops out. Fire is whether it's prescribed fire or it's a wildfire. When you have fire, you do emit lots of VOCs. Next slide, please. Now that's the total quantity, but if we only look at composition, let's see, everything is set to 100%. So what we see here is that from 2011 to 2017, actually, surprisingly to many, the motor vehicle emission actually account for less fraction. We're talking about 3% less of total NOx emissions. And this is again because vehicles are getting cleaner. So off-road engines account for about 20%, quite significant of the total NOx emissions. Next slide, please. So with regard to VOC, again, we see the vegetation is a big chunk, but in other parts, we see motor vehicles account for quite significant, and also off-road engines, fire, we see the blue colors. I want to briefly mention this. From vegetation emission, you can see they do change between years. One of the reasons is because vegetation emission, how trees emit this smells, is actually depends on meteorology, depends on the temperature and humidity, a bunch of other factors, and depending on what type of tree it is. So we account for that in our calculation. That's why we run weather model to simulate this. So it's likely simply due to meteorology, and this thing we have no control over. Next slide, please. So we basically briefly go over the task one, task two. Task one, we want to estimate the vehicle emissions. In task two, we estimate emission from all the sources we can think of. And due to time constraint, of course, we cannot present every single piece of information we find over there, but that's the most important findings. Now here is the portion we need your help. So in the final task of this study, what we want to do is how can we reduce NOx and VOC emissions counting? What policy should we use? To do this, what we did is we reviewed almost about 200 different laws and regulations, particularly in California, because California has the worst air pollution issue in the United States, and they have lots of laws available. So we reviewed the 200 different laws, and we picked those that's relevant to us, and we compiled into different categories. There are many different other laws we did not do because we did not compile them simply because they are kind of irrelevant. For example, we have a law that regulates winery, and the winery population here is not that the emission from wineries in this region is not that significant. Does not require a dedicated law on that one. So I want to quickly mention that. So we do not intend to include everything we can think of. This is simply because it's just a little, maybe too much, out of scope. Rather, what we're trying to do here is we want to find the most what else people are doing, and what policy is most relevant to us. What can we do to do this? So, next slide, please. And we very roughly we categorize into 6 different categories, the different laws. Eventually, we compiled over 73 of different laws and regulations. But I want to quickly mention this different category does not mean they are mutually exclusive. It's simply because they're relevant. So one law may fit into different categories because it can be quite complicated depending on the details. So the categories we have is emission control for existing vehicles, encourage non-motorized travel, public transit, electric vehicle, alternative fuel vehicles, and reducing single occupancy vehicle trips, and renewable energy. So we're going to briefly go over each one of them. So the first one is emission control for existing vehicles. Now, in this different policy here, what people are trying to achieve is cut down emission from all the vehicles currently on the road. The most important one is inspection maintenance. I think we know that in other states, for example, in Georgia and California, you have to bring your car to do emission testing every single year or every 2 years, something like that. And if your car fails emission testing, you might have to take it off road. That's inspection maintenance program. So the whole idea of this inspection maintenance program is to identify the most heavily pollution vehicles and take them off road. These vehicles, they account for small teeny portion of the total vehicle number, but they can't account for a big chunk of the total emissions. They're the most pollution heavy vehicles. That's something what we can do. It costs a lot of money, as you can tell. We also show the different, impact, cost, and feasibility here. And the impact is we basically, roughly speaking, how much impact on emissions we anticipate, and what is the cost it's going to be, and how feasible it is. I want to quickly mention that here it's just very rough, because if we want to, the whole purpose is we want to find what's your favorite, what do you want to see, then we dig deeper. We dig deeper to see exactly, to give you, to quantify a number from there, to see what is going to be the impact cost. So, and how the first one we mentioned is inspection maintenance. We can also do transportation management. So in transportation management, you can do congestion mitigation. So for example, you have transportation project trying to improve the traffic flow, reduce congestion. And if you have a car, you can naturally, if you think about it, if you have a car idling for 10 hours versus freely driving on the road, of course, the idling car gives you more pollution. And the better traffic flow you have, the less emission you would have. This is general rule of thumb. So transportation management, if you have a project trying to improve it, like that you drive better, you will have less emissions. We can also catalyst converter mandates. So this is okay if you have some vehicles that are running off-road or on the road that doesn't have catalyst converter, you're going to have to install that thing over there. And it's just a mandate. And we can also do idling restrictions. Now, this is, for example, school bus. I see the school bus is waiting to pick up students. We can say, well, unfortunately, you can't idling for more than 10 minutes because that's pump too much pollution. Maybe you can idle for 5 minutes. If it's waiting too long, how about you just shut down the car and you turn it on when the kids are there? So we can do restriction on trucks. So in truck stops, you can say, well, trucks, you have been idling too long and this air smells bad. Maybe you can only idling for 1 hour, or maybe less than that. The next is truck link and speed restrictions. So what we can do is, okay, for the heavy duty trucks, 18-wheelers, they're traveling on I-4, we can ask them, okay, maybe you shouldn't use the leftmost lane, because that's restrict that. Maybe we can reserve the lane for passenger cars, for other cars. We ask the trucks to use the right lane, so to reduce their speed limit. The reason this one was there is because for heavy duty trucks, their least emission is around 55 miles per hour. If it goes up, goes down, you have higher emissions. We can also require vapor recovery equipment. So this is, especially in California, you see them. So in the gas, when you fill in your cars, you put the gas, you try to insert the fuel gun into your vehicle. In there, you have a special nozzle. And that nozzle is basically suck all the fuel vapors out. It's called vapor recovery. This way, when you put gasoline in, so the gas vapor doesn't escape from the fuel tank. So that's causing pollution issues. So this is roughly, very briefly, what the emission control for existing vehicles. So the next policy would be encouraging non-motorized travel. So this was closely related to the mobility week. So there are many different policies in California, especially trying to encourage people to do not drive their car. What But some of the policy could be provide incentive for electric bikes. If you ride an electric bike, there will be some financial incentives for that or tax exemption, things like that. And if a company wants to build a bike charging station network, something like that, there will be some incentives to allow them to maybe to basically to compensate them for partially for the expenses. And we can also make exemptions. So make this if a project that's focused on non-motorized travel would encourage walking and biking, they are exempt from certain environmental regulations. And this way, so we can make the process much more friendly and faster for transportation project like this. And this is quite feasible in this region. Next policy, please. And we can also implement policies related to public transit. So some of the laws related laws in effect is, well, we can for certain routes. Let's see, it's a certain route we do not expect a lot of ridership. Maybe we can switch to smaller buses instead of the big buses that are quite expensive. Maybe we can encourage public transit system to use cleaner buses. For example, some of the UCF shuttle bus was running on propane. It's not running on diesel or gasolines. And maybe you can adopt electric vehicle buses, something like that along that line. So there are other policies that basically ban high emission engine. If emission engine, we know this, maybe a retrofitted diesel engine has been over 20 years old. We know it's high emitter. Maybe we can do not allow the public transit to use engine like this because we know it's dirty. And what we also can do is encourage ridership, basically encourage people to take public transit. There are many different approaches to do this. One approach what we can do is free ridership. We say, well, if you're elderly population, if you're over the age of 60, you can ride the bus for free. Maybe for UCF students, if you are students, just show your student ID, you can ride bus for free. There are different approaches we can do to encourage people to take the bus, to take like public transit. So that will cut down the emissions. Of course, in transportation planning, what we can do is put more prioritize on the projects that's basically either build transit system or encourage the use of transit system. They receive higher priority. This would encourage the transportation use. Next slide, please. And this category is electric vehicles alternative fuel. Now, this is a major category. There are several dozens of laws and regulations specifically in this category, but we very roughly put them into two subcategories. One subcategory is adoption incentive. The other subcategory is the building infrastructure. So the adoption sensitive, as you guys probably are well aware, is that right now if you buy a EV, for example, if you buy a Tesla, you can receive up to $7,500 of rebate. So that's tax credit exemption, the tax credit, and even direct financial rebate, things like this. So the whole idea is encourage people to use electric vehicles. If you buy one, use one, you can receive certain incentives financially to encourage the use. And there are some programs that focus on low-income communities. If someone in the low-income community cannot afford it, there is a special program that's dedicated for these communities that maybe give them higher financial incentives. In California, there are some. You probably heard the news that the California Air Resources Board actually banned new gasoline engines. It's a sale after 2035. That's one of the aggressive rules available that can be adopted technically. Also, you can also implement policies that encourage building a charging network. So some corporations, they can receive incentives for building charging stations, and not only say electric vehicles, you can also provide the incentive to build alternative fuel, such as solar panels. That's also alternative fuel, and propane and ethanol, bunch of different alternative fuel charging station, or even hydrogen if you want it. There are policies in place that make it, if you choose to build the infrastructure, the permitting process can be simplified, so it's easier and faster for people to do that. There are policies exempt construction code. In some construction project, its construction code can be a little bit tricky, but if you try to implement a charging network over there, maybe some of the code you do not have to strictly adhere to. So depending on circumstances, of course. And finally, we have other policies. For example, that adding more new code. If you were to build a new commercial building, maybe a new residential building over a certain amount of dollars, it's required that you put an EV charging station, EV charger over there. So that's basically the different policy. Again, this is a rough overview. So we're talking about like several dozen different policies, but collectively they are focusing, they can put them into different categories as listed here. So the next big group is policies targeting basically reducing single occupancy vehicle trips. There are policies, for example, incentive P2P vehicle sharing. So if you're not driving your car, maybe you can lease it out. There are some existing apps in place that you can lease your own vehicle out to make some money on the side while you're not using it. There are policies you can encourage carpooling. For example, if people work in the same corporate branch and they happen to live in the same area, maybe you can let them do corporate carpooling, and the corporate can provide incentive to encourage the employee to do that. And we can also provide incentives for ride-sharing services. For example, if you use Uber, if you use Lyft, we can provide some incentives to just encourage you, do not drive your own car. It's just too much waste. And you will also, if you drive on the highway, you can also sometimes see high occupancy vehicle lanes. So those are lanes dedicated for cars that have two or more people in there. So just trying to encourage people to not drive a car only when one people there. So it's just waste of the energy. Next one, please. So the final category is renewable energy. Now, these are policies in place that are trying to encourage the use of renewable energy, trying to burning less fossil fuels. We know that driving is actually one of the contribute to most to NOx emissions. In this category, people can the different agencies can provide incentives for adoption of renewable energy product. One example would be solar panels. If you install solar panels, there may be some rebate available, financial incentives available. The different agencies can also provide incentives, financial incentives, if you generating renewable energy. If, for example, building a solar farm, something like that, and you're building infrastructure in place for generating solar energy, there may be financial incentives. We can provide financial incentives to encourage projects like this. So that's basically the 6 very broad categories of policies. So I'll hand it over to Sarah.
Thanks, Dr. Yu. Yeah, so we're going to ask you one more polling question. So of the 6 policies that Dr. Yu has presented to you, which do you think would be most effective for Central Florida? Think about your region, think about where you live, which one are you most interested in learning more about, or which ones do you think we should do more research on? So again, the first policy was controlling emissions for existing vehicles. Encouraging non-motorized travel was the second policy. The third policy was public transportation. The fourth policy was EVs and alternative fuel. Fifth policy was reducing single occupant vehicle trips. And the last policy was renewable energy. And you should see that poll now. So take some time and reply, and we're looking forward to seeing your answers. All right, good. We're getting some responses in. I know it's hard to, choose just one, but we will have a survey available. We'll ask you more in-depth questions about each of the policies, and we really encourage you to take that survey. And I'll give you some more information on that in just a second. So if you're having trouble choosing between one or another, don't worry. This isn't the end-all be-all for choosing which policy we're going to research more. Okay. So we've got some responses here. And it looked pretty split. We've got controlling emissions is pretty high up, and reducing single occupancy vehicle trips is also up there. And tied for first is public transportation and EVs and alternative fuels. So thank you very much for those responses. Okay, so as I mentioned, we do have a survey, and the survey, it'll pop up when you close out of today's webinar. You will be brought to the survey, and if you don't have time right now, that's okay. There will be a link available. We're going to put that in the chat for you in just a moment, so you can take it whenever is convenient for you. And if you missed some parts about today's webinar and you want to rewatch it and refresh your memory, we will have this recording available on our YouTube channel, which there is also a link in the chat. We would love to have your responses by Friday, November 18th. So get it in before the Thanksgiving break. And then once we have your responses, we can pass it over to our UCF team, and they can kind of take a deep dive into all of those different policy options that we talked about today. Now, we may have some questions on what we discussed today, and if you could please put your questions in the Q&A, then we will be able to get to your questions that you have. And let me get there. Yeah. If you have any questions about the research that UCF has done, what Metro Plan has been working on for the ozone contingency plan and air quality in general, or things about policies that you think maybe we missed, or what about this or what about that, we would love to hear from you. So we're going to give you some time, and please put some questions in the chat for us, or in the Q&A specifically. Sorry. I'll give everyone some time to take in the Q&A.
I see one raised hand. Is it possible to allow the participant to speak?
We are encourage everyone to put their questions in the chat, just for today's webinar. Okay, we have a question in the chat, and this one is for you, Dr. Halfay. Do you see a potential for biofuel increased use?
Personally, I think we do see potential, but it depends on the adoption, depends on where we use it, like how the perception, will people use it. So that actually is, we probably have to dig deeper on that direction.
And Dr. Yu, can you explain a little bit more about what biofuels are for those who might not be familiar?
Sure. So biofuel can cover many different types of fuel actually, but the biofuel is, for example, it's extracted from corn, something like that. It's not mined from oil, from not gasoline. This thing that can be from renewable sources. But the depends on what type of biofuel it is, how it burns in the car engine is different. The performance may be a little bit different.
Okay, good to know. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And thank you, Doug, for your question. Right, and we got another question from Robin. Has any dispersion modeling been done at any of the frequently used outdoor locations, such as Lake Eola, to get a more refined level of local air quality?
Right. So we haven't run a dispersion modeling. So we run emission models. So, but on a related note, we do have at UCI, we have another project. We plan to run a model, but it's not dispersion model. It's more, it's a different type of model to get the concentration. But that's for different purposes, of course. So if you're interested, we do have our own network in place. We design our own air quality monitoring network, and it's currently the data is live. I can maybe you can contact privately. I can send you the link. You can take a look at the more localized air quality in there.
Right. Thanks for your question, Robin. And as Doctor, you mentioned, you can reach out to either of us, and I'll go ahead and put our emails in the chat so that way,
Okay.
if anyone has any questions for us after the fact, you can reach out. Okay. All right. All right, and we have another question from Doug. It's okay that you were late, no problem. If you want to catch up on the beginning part, you can check it out online. But his question is, how is OIA accommodated in our studies?
Sorry, I have to.
Yeah, Orlando International Airport.
Of course, sorry. I see. So I assume what you mean is, does the study count for airport emissions? And the answer, yes, it's counted in there. So the data we got from there, we have the activities like in there, and we have the emission rates for the activities. So we did calculate the emissions from the airport in here, not only OIA, but also executive airport and things like this. It is accounted in there.
Great. Right. And as I am typing up our emails in the chat, please feel free to add some more questions. And for the sake of our YouTube followers who can't see the chat, my email is SLARSEN @Metroplan Orlando. So that's SLarsen @Metroplan Orlando. And Dr. Haofei Yu's email is haofeiyu at ucf.edu, which is HAOFEI period YU at UCF.edu.
Thanks.
Yeah. All right. Do you have any more burning questions? Haha. All right, that was so stupid fun. Joanne, I see you have your hand raised. If you could type your question into the chat, then we'll be able to answer, or into the Q&A, then we'll be able to answer your that you might have. All right. Oh, we have a question from Joanne. Can we have 24-hour transportation service every 15 minutes? That's the goal. We would love to have that, and I'm sure that would help out with our air quality. So thank you so much for your comment. All right, and I think that's it for today. Thank you everyone so much for joining us. If you have any more questions, please feel free to email us. And we really encourage you to take the survey. Again, it'll when you close out of Zoom, you'll be sent to our survey, and you have until Friday, November 18th, to send us your responses. So, and encourage all of your friends who live in Central Florida to take the survey as well, because we all have the right to breathe clean air. Thank you so much for your time today, and we'll see you again soon. Bye, everyone.